based on, where you get a population that's big enough to get the poll workers that you need to actually hold an election in person. So it was from the experience that we had. Lieutenant Governor spent many hours, both in the primary and the general, speaking with community leaders, recruiting election workers in some of these rural areas. And we feel that 750 was about the bubble where it became harder to recruit workers for an in-person election.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to go back to perhaps the Department of Law again. And I should have asked this before I went over to the Lieutenant Governor's office, but was there any effort while this was taking place to ask the courts about U.S. constitutional authority to change election law? The court's doing it, I should say. I didn't say that right. But was there issue raised either in the state level or another state or federal level that you're aware of from the Department of Law to raise that issue, the court's changing election law?
So Chair Shower again, Corey Mills for the record. Since this was a state court case based on the state constitution, no, those federal issues were not brought up, and we evaluated those issues, monitoring them as they were going through, others. We were definitely monitoring cases nationwide, but we never really saw a good argument how to work that in a way that would be viable or help our court case. So no, we did not include it since ours was a very state-centric issue.
Okay, thank you. And then another question, I think it probably is going to go back to the Division of Elections. What protocols are in place to assure the voter rolls are accurate? And how do you assure the, if you could go down that, well, I'm just going to ask that one question for now, the voter rolls, as we talk about that. Can you, probably going to go back to the Director, Gail Finamia, if you'd like to take that one, the record on this particular bill?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. Gail Finamia, Division of Elections. I did provide to the committee a document that outlines all the list maintenance processes that the division undertakes in an attempt, in our best effort, to keep the voter rolls as clean as possible in accordance with state and federal law. Do you have that document?
We do have those. I guess what I would ask for at this point, Gail, if you don't mind, is, okay, we're talking on I know they're somewhat overlapping. That's why I made that caveat up front. If you could give us, you don't have to get in the weeds, but kind of that 30,000 foot view, because we're back on election, integrity voting, etc.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. So the division follows the provisions that are in statute, Alaska Statute 1507130, which outline a very detailed annual list maintenance process that meets the guidelines under the National Voter Registration Act. The division also participates in a 30-state cross-state matching program, and we send notices to people that appear to be registered, may be registered to vote in other states, as well as we get information on voter deaths from a variety of sources, the ERIC group being one. We also get a list from our state Health and Analytics Division. Staff has also received notifications from voters' families when someone is deceased. They also are sent obituaries. They look, in the paper for obituaries. We receive notifications from, voters cancel on their own. They'll call or write us saying requesting their own cancellation. We also receive notifications from other secretaries of state's offices when people have registered to vote in their state and have indicated they were previously registered in the state of Alaska, and we cancel registrations based on that. I think that's just kind of the 30,000 foot view.
Thank you, Ms. Phenomena. That's good for now on this particular one. I'm just reading through the sponsor statement and trying to touch on various issues while we have all the appropriate experts back in front of us here. I think I saw Senator Kawasaki has a question. Hard.
Thank you, Director. This is for Director Finumia, just on list maintenance. And I was thinking, because we have another bill dealing with something similar, do you get information on updates if a person were to register online on the PFD application and list an address that's not the current address in which they are mailing from?
Through the chair, Senator Kawasaki, part of the PFD ABR process is that the division does receive information from the permanent fund dividend for anybody who's applied for a permanent fund dividend, and that those voters are sent notices saying we've received this information from the PFD. Do you want this information to update your voter registration record? That they have a 30-day window to opt out, and if they do not, then the information that they've provided to PFD then updates their voter registration.
It's through the chair, and it's an automated system. There isn't discretion. I'm just thinking about I'm on the Department of Revenue subcommittee, and we talked about the PFD fraud unit that uses all sorts of data sort of in a similar nature to assume that a person is a resident or is lying when they say that they're a resident for PFD application purposes.
Through the chair, Senator Kawasaki, we take the information as we would if somebody was to register to vote directly with the division on its face value, certified under penalty of perjury that person is providing the division with accurate information.
And just to follow up that with the list maintenance, then, if the PFD division later found that a person were applying for a PFD, but the easy way is just by pinging their account, finding that they're not using a proxy or using a proxy service or using something else. They are actually doing it from another state, because I know that they've identified people like that in the fraud unit who have applied, claimed that they were in the state at the time, but weren't actually in the state based on their IP address.
And through the chair, Senator Kawasaki, a voter does not need to be in the state in order to be registered to vote. So I'm not sure if I'm understanding your question completely.
Through the chair, I'm just trying to get the nexus between the automatic voter PFD, or we're talking about ABR also, this isn't in this bill, but we're talking about the automatic voter registration. So I know that people have applied for a PFD. Maybe they aren't able to apply for a PFD, or maybe they don't even live in the state, but they've applied for a PFD claiming they lived at their former address. And do you have any way to maintain the list for that particular case?
Through the chair, Senator Kawasaki, no, we do not. If a voter registers through the PFD process and we get their information and they do not return the opt-out notice, then they would become duly registered based on the information provided to us from PFD.
And I would like to follow up to that, Senator Kawasaki, because the question we've asked recently and had an answer is that the data that is received from that application is passed through. So as far as we can tell at this point, we don't have any information that says that there is some kind of a cross-check on those people as they come across. In other words, it is passed directly through the PFD department to the Division of Elections. So we're still investigating further to get more fidelity on it, but that is, you just highlighted something that I wasn't going to mention, but I am, since we just got that data recently. Thank you. Okay, Senator Rambo, I think you had a question.
Yes, and just throwing back time about 7 years or so, maybe 8, I think Feige had a bill in regards to military, and if they had any intention of ever coming back to the state, they could apply for a PFD. And I'm not sure, are you aware of that bill, Ms. Cinnamoni?
Through the chair, this is Senator Reinbold. This is Gail from the Division of Elections again. I do not know what the PFD rules are. I think perhaps somebody from PFD would be the better resource for you to get that information. I do know, though, that there is, for voter registration purposes, Title 15 provides an intent to return, that as long as a voter claims an intent to return, they do not lose their residency for the purposes of voting.
Senator Rambo, I would just follow up that as a military guy. We did see the PFD division caught up to us in the sense of while we were away for a few years and came back, they cut us off even though we had everything listed here, but we were always able to absentee vote. That never changed. So it's there was definitely a difference between how the PFD division was handling it and Division of Elections, if that makes sense, at least for a partial question. That's from empirical data, having been through it. Absolutely. Go ahead.
My question would next be the intent to return. I just think that needs to be defined. It's something, I've had many calls in regards to this. So where people just come and they just pop in and they're just visiting grandma for a day or a week or whatever. So I'm not sure if that might be something, in regards to how that is outlined in regards to how they end up getting the voting. So I think clarifying that is really important. If the PFD is dealing differently than the voting, I mean maybe that's an excellent opportunity to rectify the records. Is basically what I'm stating.
Thank you, Senator Rambold. Does anybody who wants to comment on that? They're welcome to. If there's more of a comment. Okay. If we can. Yes. Okay. Do you want to take an at ease and address it real quick? We're good to finish up. This one's okay?
Okay.
Okay. Other questions at this time from anyone? Okay. Seeing none, we're going to go ahead and, first of all, thank everybody for being online today to help out. I know this gets painful at times, and for those that did not talk, we're going to ask for amendments for this bill, Senate Bill 83. They're going to be open until this Friday, March 5th at 5 p.m., so basically close the business this week. Go ahead and commit them or submit those to our committee aide, Terrence Shanigan, via email. We're going to go ahead and set this bill aside and take it up at a future meeting. And briefly, we're going to take an at ease just to answer a question here. Thank you for that brief question and answer there real quick. Okay, thank you very much. We're going to move on this time to the second item on the agenda, SB84 Land Vouchers PFD, sponsored by Governor Dunleavy. As a note for the committee, today we've got the following people with us invited by the sponsor to present the bill. It's going to be Mike Barnhill, Deputy Commissioner for Department of Revenue, Marty Parsons, Director, Anna McKinnon, Acting Director, PFD, Bertie Bowen, DMVA Veterans Affairs Administrator, Shonda O'Brien, Director, DHSS. Mr. Barnhill, you know the drill. Go ahead and put yourself on the record and walk us through your bill, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name for the record is Mike Barnhill, Deputy Commissioner for the Department of Revenue. Mr. Chair, you probably remember this bill from last session. It was styled as SB 217. This is the bill where the governor proposes to create a program through the Permanent Fund Dividend Program in which applicants can elect, in lieu of a cash PFD, a Permanent Fund Dividend land voucher. The face value of the land voucher would be 2 times the statutory formula amount of the PFD, and as an example of that, let's assume that the statutory formula amount of the PFD in a particular year is $2,300. Let's also assume the legislature appropriates an amount for PFDs that's different than that. Let's say it works out to $1,000 per PFD. Under this bill, the face value of the land voucher would be 2 times the $2,300 or $4,600. The purpose of the land vouchers is to give Alaskans the opportunity to use those vouchers to purchase state land from the Department of Natural Resources. Land vouchers have deep historic precedent in this country. They were first used by the United States Congress to compensate veterans of the American Revolutionary War. Subsequent to that, they were also used to compensate veterans of the wars of 1812 and the Mexican War. Various states have used land vouchers at statehood to distribute land and settle their states. The overall objective of the governor in this proposal is to help get state land into the hands of Alaskans. So that's just the broad outline of the bill, Mr. Chair. Before I move to the next page, I'll just pause and see if there are any questions.
Pause at this moment for questions from the committee members. Seeing none, we're going to move on. If you're ready, Mike, get into the sectional analysis, please.
So page 2 more or less functions as the sectional analysis. These are the details. First, vouchers can't be used to purchase mental health trust lands. Parents can't apply for vouchers for their children. In other words, children aren't eligible for land vouchers. Land vouchers can't be used to pay rents or fees on state land, just the purchase price for state land. Vouchers are only available through the electronic application for the permanent fund dividend. And that's consistent with how we manage the Pick, Click, Give program. And the purpose for that is just, one, to encourage people to use the electronic application and ease in administration. This bill also requires that in order to be eligible, PFD applicants need to be determined eligible within the PFD year. Again, this is to aid in the administration of this. There are a number of PFD applications that aren't determined for eligibility purposes until after the normal PFD is issued, and if that happens, then those people lose their eligibility in that particular year. Land vouchers are transferable and they never expire. So if you elect and receive a land voucher, you can sell it to your cousin, whether they live in Alaska or not. They will always have the ability to submit to purchase state land. The Department of Revenue will track the vouchers. We will track in transfers. We will replace lost, stolen, and destroyed vouchers. And then we get to the garnishment. So the way garnishment works is the amount that a land voucher can be garnished is the same amount as the cash PFD. So if we go back to my example, and the cash PFD in a particular year is $1,000, the amount of garnishment that can take place with respect to both the land voucher as well as the cash PFD is the same. It can be garnished up to $1,000. In the case of the land voucher, what would happen is the department would reduce the amount garnished from the face value of the land voucher and issue the land voucher with a revised face value. So in our example, if $1,000 got garnished, the land voucher that would be issued would be for $3,600. For those applicants who elect the land voucher, the amount of cash that they forego in terms of the cash value of the PFD, this bill provides that that cash would lapse into the general fund. And finally, for purposes of eligibility for benefits programs administered by the Department of Health and Social Services or any other benefits programs, this bill provides that the administrator must consider the voucher as income and resources in determining eligibility. So, Mr. Chair, I'll pause there if there are any questions, and I also have an array of subject matter experts that can also be available for questions.
Questions from committee members at this time? Anyone? Okay. I do not see any questions at this time.
So page 3, Mr. Chair, is I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Parsons from the Department of Natural Resources to just make some points from their perspective.
Okay.
And Mr. Chair, in the event that Mr. Parsons didn't make it online, I'm happy to cover this very quickly.
Okay, I show him here. Do you drop off or is he still there?
You may be trying to.
Does show him available.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes.
Chairman Schaller, I was muted.
There you go. Common.
Good afternoon.
Go ahead, Mr. Parsons.
Good afternoon. This is, for the record, this is Marty Parsons. I'm the Director of the Division of Mining, Land, and Water within the Department of Natural Resources. Our division pretty much handles the land sales for most of the programs for the state of Alaska. Yeah, this particular bill, as we look at it, I think this helps us move forward with our constitutional mandate to help develop
our resources and the land of Alaska consistent with the public interest. There's no state in the Union that has less land in private hands than Alaska does. When we look at private land, I'm talking about the individual landholder. About 0.5% of the land is actually held by individuals here in Alaska. This particular voucher bill, where we can actually use our land as currency, as opposed to just the hard value currency that we might look at, I think, as a win for both the individual and for the state treasury. The bill is a response to what we have seen from some of the surveys we have taken. We just recently concluded a survey of folks in Alaska and those that participate in our land sale program of what is an impediment to them participating in it. About 1,000 people replied, and somewhere just south of 20% of them said one of the main reasons is either cost of land or money available. So we think that this is an opportunity for them to use this voucher where they might have been cash strapped to participate in our land sale programs. That being the case, we think it's a really excellent opportunity to get more Alaska lands into Alaska hands. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Okay, not seeing any questions at the moment. I have a couple here. Just as I had 0.5% in private ownership. I know about a percent is, it's a pretty small number when you look at what's total there, considering other lands owned by larger entities, state, federal, etc., tribal, historical lands. How much land is roughly eligible if you were to say, and you may have this number, maybe not acreage-wise. Is it 500,000 acres in different areas, and then how desirable is that land? Because much of it, I know in the past where people were able to homestead, it's great, but you've got to, get a helicopter to drop you off somewhere way out there, and then you're on your own. So if you could talk a little bit about how much and kind of the location of where much of it is, like close to the road system, is it going to be the same kind of thing where it's really remote? I think that would help as well.
Absolutely, Senator Shabbat. Thank you for the question. We went through our planning documents where we identify and classify land, and there's just north of 2 million acres of state land that's classified right now as settlement, which is one of the classifications that they would need for it to be included in the land sale program. And you are correct. Much of the land that the state has is semi to very remote. We do have some lands along the highways. I think of, in particular, Toke. We've got a land sale program up along the Glen Highway, just south of Glen Ellen, called Thousand Skies. That has road access. Chinaki Pond, which is over by Wasilla. We have some around Fairbanks. There's not a lot on the road system. Most of that land that would have been state land has been conveyed to municipalities for them to increase their tax base and part of their municipal entitlement. We have several programs that we run. We have a subdivision program, which usually is closer to municipalities or road systems. Sometimes we have remote subdivisions that have platted roads and identified lots. We have a remote cabin staking program where we set aside, just for round numbers, say 50,000 acres of state land, and 20 people get to go out in that remote area and stake up to 20-acre parcels that they have the opportunity to buy. And then, of course, we work with the Division of Agriculture and their program. So we cover the state, but as you know, there's very little infrastructure in the state, so much of the land that we have available is remote, and we've worked very, very hard to make sure that the land we offer has buildable sites on it. That was one of the issues that we faced back in the 80s and 90s. Was much of the land was divided up where they didn't do a lot of. There wasn't the ability to go out and do a lot of assessment before the lands were subdivided. We've changed that, and we try to make sure that all the lots that we sell have buildable sites on them. So I hope that answers your question, but yes, much of it is remote.
It does. Thank you. I was more just want to get that on the record because I agree that a lot of folks have talked about price, but one of the other things that I've heard consistently is the remoteness. Not that there's much we can do about that right now, but it is also another impediment to many people to get these properties because they become more of for many, a vacation property, a cabin, a getaway kind of thing. That's fine. Not to say anything's wrong with that, but it's just the infrastructure we have available, as you pointed out, makes this really difficult for a lot of folks because you might be able to buy the land, but now you're going to have to figure out how to, like I said, to get equipment and other things out there too. It's pretty cost prohibitive. The other thing, if you could just talk to briefly, I have two more questions. One is size, and some of the comments are, well, the PFD, depending on whether we provide a full PFD or a partial PFD, that's not a lot of money necessarily available to purchase depending on the size. So if you had, and it's fine if you don't have, again, I know you're taking an educated guess, but for the properties that you're going to be talking about relative to the rough size of the PFD, anywhere from probably $2,000 to maybe $5,000 or $6,000, maybe a little bit of a dream there, for an individual PFD, what type parcels are you looking at? Are we talking about 2 acres, 5 acres, 10? What would the kind of an average be that somebody might be able to purchase? And I know it changes based on location and how good the land is, all those kinds of things, but just an educated guess on what you would foresee as the type of acreage somebody might be able to purchase within reason.
Absolutely, Chair Shower. One of the things that we look at is, let's say we have a 5-acre parcel, which is pretty much an average size parcel that we try to sell due to things like septic and water and buildable sites. They're running about $3,000 an acre, so you're looking at $15,000 to buy a 5-acre parcel. If you look at the statutory calculation of the PFD, let's say it came up to $2,600. You double that, we're at what, $5,200. You got a wife and a husband that pool their vouchers together. You get a little over $10,000 that they could put towards that $15,000 purchase, and then of course the state has a very generous financing capabilities for them to take on that other $5,000.
That's a good answer. Thank you. I just wanted to highlight to the folks as they ask a question. Another one, just very briefly, is does it have to be a family for people to come together and pool? In other words, could let's say Senator Holland and I wanted to buy a plot of land, could our being separate families, could we do that, or does it have to be a spouse, like a husband and wife, that kind of a thing? What are some of the other criteria that might be important, having not looked at it?
Mr. Chair, from my reading, I don't believe there's a limitation, but I'd really like to throw that back to Deputy Commissioner Barnhill to give you a more concise answer.
And he's trying to jump on the line, so Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Mike Barnhill, for the record, there's no limitation on pooling in the legislation, so you can pool your land vouchers with anyone.
So you could have, for example, say 10 people wanted to get together and have $50,000. You could do that.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And then last question, and this is just a clarification. These are not allodial titles, correct? So they're not going to be permanent to somebody. They're going to be as if I was purchasing land through a normal, from another person kind of a thing. Is that also true, correct?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Parsons on that. I assume the title to the land is the same title that would be granted in any other state land sale.
Senator Shower, or this Marty Parsons, Director of the Division of Mine, Land, and Water. No, you will get title similar to any other land purchase that you have from the state.
Just wanted to make sure. Thank you. Other questions from committee members? Senator Holland?
Thank you. So we did this a year or two ago, I believe, and they offered land for permanent fund dividend purchases. Did that get used much?
Through the chair, Senator Holland, we've discussed this, and this bill was introduced as SB 217 in the last legislature, but it's never been enacted into law.
Okay, for some reason I thought. And as for future planning, would the money stay in the earnings reserve account, or does it get transferred to some portion of the state for payment for the property?
Through the chair, Senator Holland, that's a great segue to the next page. So if we could turn over to the cash flow hypothetical on page 4, this shows how the money flows. And Mr. Chair, may I go ahead and introduce this?
Sure, go ahead, Mike.
Okay, great. So we put this together at this committee's request last year, and I think it's really helpful to show how the money moves. One thing I have to say at the outset as a caveat, this is simply a hypothetical. It's not a projection as to level of participation, and it's not a projection as to how much land will be actually purchased. It's just a way to show how the money moves. So in this hypothetical, we start with the numbers I set out at the beginning of the hearing. The statutory PFD is $2,300 a person, actual appropriation of $1,000 a person, land voucher under this legislation of $4,600 a person. We have, roughly 640,000 PFD applicants. In this hypothetical, 600,000 elect the cash PFD, 40,000 elect the land voucher PFD. The total amount of money that moves from the earnings reserve in rough terms, rounded terms, to the permanent fund dividend fund is 640,000 times 1,000, or 640 million. And then breaking it down, cash PFDs of 600 million, and funds that are not elected because the people chose the land voucher, 40,000 times $1,000, 40 million. That money under this bill, the 40 million, lapses to the general fund. The face value of the land vouchers here is the $4,600 a person times the 40,000 participants, 184 million. In this hypothetical, again, not a projection, just for numerical illustration, we're assuming $300 million in land sales, to which that 184 million in land vouchers would be applied, and then we would need the purchasers would need to bring another 116 million in cash from their own resources to complete the purchase of 300 million. When you take the 116 million in cash from the purchases, plus the 40 million in lapsing PFDs to the general fund, that's 156 million that ends up in the general fund as a result of this hypothetical. I'm happy to pause there and see if there are any questions.
Good. No questions, Mike.
Okay. And then the final slide we have here, Mr. Chair, page 6 is a mock-up of the land voucher. Just to give the community an idea of what it would look like. It looked kind of like, one of the historic bonds that governments used to issue with the fancy calligraphy. Each land voucher will have an individual serial number. It'll have the basic terms of the land voucher on the front of it, so people remember how the program works, with contact information for the Department of Revenue in terms of when they want to transfer it. They know who to contact in order to register that transfer. Obviously, the face value, and so that's it.
Okay. Further questions for the presenters at this time? All right, I am not seeing any further questions. Any follow-up or any closing comments, Mr. Barnhill, from anyone?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, the overarching purpose here is to get state lands into the hands of Alaskans. In the history of the United States, land has often been the ticket to self-sufficiency. And so the governor hopes by accelerating the distribution of land to Alaskans, it will help Alaskans have land on which to build homes, on which to build cabins, on which to potentially build businesses, and move everyone in the state to a higher degree of self-sufficiency.
I would mention one of the things we just saw in a presentation of transportation was road infrastructure work. For example, west of Sitna. So they're definitely one of the barriers, as I have mentioned, is the cost of getting to the land, and if you're not flying or out in the wintertime, it's awful hard to do. So I agree with the concept behind it. It's just there is a little more to it for folks, so things to work on, but you got to take step one to get there. So thank you, Mr. Barnhill and other presenters today. We're going to go ahead and move on with amendments to SB84 open until this Friday, March 5th again, concurrent theme. At close of business by 5 p.m. Go ahead and submit them to my committee aide, Terrence Shanigan. We're going to set this bill aside as we move on to the last bill for the day. We're going to move on to SJR1, Constitutional Amendment, Guaranteed Permanent Fund, sponsored by Senator Wielechowski. We've already heard this bill. We're moving on to the next phase. We have additional testimony from the sponsor. Following his testimony, we're going to hear testimony from Joe Geldof, attorney, and Rick Halford, former Senate President. Once we've heard the invited testimony, we will open the floor to testimony on public testimony, on SJR1. Senator Wielechowski, you are here and ready. You know the drill, so when you're ready, sir, please begin.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Bill Wielechowski, State Senator representing East Anchorage and J-Bear, and I'm joined by Sonia Kawasaki, my Chief of Staff. And if you recall, Mr. Chairman, this bill puts the original statutory PFD formula into the Constitution. It also does one thing, and I just want to clarify. It does get rid of the earnings reserve. And people may ask, well, why get rid of the earnings reserve? Here's the problem. If you put the original PFD statute into the Constitution and you leave the earnings reserve the way it is, that would mean the legislature still has the unfettered ability to take whatever it wants out of the earnings reserve. In that case, you can very easily envision a scenario where the legislature repeatedly withdraws funds from the earnings reserve to the point where there's not enough to pay a dividend. And so we've abolished the earnings reserve, and we've actually created a constitutional percent of market value where you can withdraw up to 5% of the value of the permanent fund. That money goes first priority to pay a dividend. If the government, and then the remainder may be used by the government to pay for government expenses. It's similar to an endowment type program that you see in many institutions around the world. We think it's the best way to protect the dividend. We think it's the best way to ensure that the people get the first call on the dividend, which is the original intent of the permanent fund dividend. And that's what the bill does, Mr. Chairman. And then there was one other document which you had asked about historic funding of PFDs through automatic transfers, and we just provided you actually a brief that Ms. Kawasaki and I had provided to the Alaska Supreme Court on this issue, and there were there were several instances when the permanent fund dividend program was originally created where funds were transferred to the dividend fund from the permanent fund without appropriation. And this is important because this was really the basis for the lawsuit was there doesn't need to be an appropriation. If there doesn't need to be an appropriation of a dividend, the governor can't veto it. That was our essential argument. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court disagreed. But I just wanted to provide you with that information that you had requested, Mr. Chairman. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for the bill sponsor this time? No? Go ahead, Senator Hall.
Sure. So the ERA gets rolled into the permanent fund. I know there's not much left in the Constitutional Budget Reserve. Does that still remain?
Yes, Senator Holland, through the chair. This has no impact on the Constitutional Budget Reserve. There's, I think, $1 billion or $1.5 billion in the CBR. That remains untouched.
Is that it? Okay. At this time, thank you, Senator Wielechowski and Sonia, for coming up to brief it. We're going to move on to the invited testimony coming up. We've got the first on queue here is Mr. Joe Geldof, and let's make sure we've got him on the line. And Joe, can you hear me okay?
I can, Senator Schauer.
When you're ready, sir, you just put yourself on the record, and you can proceed with your testimony.
Okay, Joe Geldof, Geldhof. I am a board member on the Alaska Permanent Fund Defenders. And thank you very much, Senator Schauer and members of the committee, for allowing me to briefly testify. And thank you to Terrence and the staff for making that happen. Chairman Clentillion asked me he sends his greetings from Howlett Cove, by the way, to all of you. But Chairman Tillian wanted me to touch a couple points, kind of macro points about the permanent fund and the permanent fund dividend. First and foremost, the permanent fund was not and never was intended to be a rainy day account for government spending. And the permanent fund, by many accounts, including Clem Tillian and Rick Halford, Jack Hickel, Juanita Casalius, and myself, all who serve on the Permanent Fund Defenders Board, is arguably the best idea Alaska's had since statehood. We saved a portion of our non-renewable resources, working for future generations. And third, what Chairman Tillian wanted me to reiterate and remind people, because it gets forgotten in sometimes the hothouse debates over the money, is the permanent fund dividend is not welfare. It is not an entitlement. It's really a form of ownership designed to meet the constitutional requirements in our Alaska Constitution that the resources of our state, which we hold in common, are developed for the maximum use of our citizens, and that they all get a little sliver of our common property, our common heritage. So I want to turn, and I will shortly get to Senate Joint Resolution number 1, but the permanent fund defenders believe there is a critical need for speed in addressing the permanent fund and the permanent fund dividend. And we say that because it's pretty clear, we've spent too much and saved too little. We've gone through our constitutional budget reserve account and our other savings accounts. We're starting to tap the earnings reserve account. Our options in terms of addressing in a comprehensive and intelligent way our fiscal problems are disappearing. And we need to act now before things get really, really bad. And we're mindful how brutal the choices you're facing are and how difficult it is to get this. But we strongly believe that the legislature needs to enact a resolution that works for Alaskans this session so it can be on the ballot in 2022. Let me turn, before I get to SJR 1, the basic principles that the Permanent Fund Defenders has adopted for looking at any proposal, including this proposal introduced by Senator Wielechowski. First and foremost, we have to protect the corpus of the fund. That means, most importantly, that the permanent fund is only going to be permanent if we avoid the impacts of inflation. We need to continue to grow the permanent fund, even in diminishing oil. We need to stop spending as soon as possible funds that are put in the earnings reserve account. And we need, for a lot of reasons, to stop the annual brawl over the permanent fund dividend. I think there's widespread agreement on that. Last, we need straightforward language that's transparent and easy to administer, that treats all Alaskans equitably by paying an equal PFD. And we're mindful we need to be able to get 14 votes in this body and 27 in the other chamber. And last, and most important perhaps, the public has to understand this. It can't have too many contingencies and gimmicks, and it has to be something that they'll understand and adopt. So turning to Senate Joint Resolution 1, Clem Tillian said, I like almost everything about it. He was troubled by the percentage of market value because he knows picking the percentage and then doing the split is tough work. But he likes very much what Senator Wielechowski and other colleagues have done in terms of the allocation of the fund. The problem the defenders have, and I'm just identifying it, is at 5%, it's arguably going to put the corpus, the principal amount, in jeopardy at some point. Later or sooner, according to the Permanent Fund Corporation and the Stress Fest folks, 5% gets wobbly and may fail. That is consistent with all of the advice we've had from economists we've worked with for years, and a number of people have been paying attention. And I regret if I sound harsh about Senator Wielechowski's bill, but we have to find a workaround around the 5%. The Rockefeller Foundation uses 4% when you move to a percentage of market value, and Senator Wielechowski is correct. The POMV is more like an annuity and less like a trust fund. So if we're going to shift to the annuity type fund, we've got to be very, very cautious in setting the percentage low enough that it will continue to grow and provide funding for both the PFD and general fund purposes in perpetuity. So I'll start winding up. I know Senator Halford is available, and he's far better than I to talk about the historic aspects of that. I guess I'm getting old. I did work briefly with Jay Hammond on various projects. I was not an acolyte of Jay Hammond, but I mostly worked with Hugh Malone. And I was fortunate to work with Oral Freeman, who were very much instrumental working with Jay Hammond, Rick Halford, Clem Tilly, and a number of people. But I'm deferring on the historic aspects and other points to Rick Halford. But we know how difficult this lift is. I can't reiterate enough how important it is to get a resolution that works in the legislature this year so that we can start the educational process and working with other Alaskans and organizations to make sure that in 2022 we actually put this issue to rest. And finally, by addressing this and putting it to rest, many of the other significant problems that you face as a legislative body will come into much clearer focus. But putting all of our efforts behind getting this resolution or a similar resolution through is absolutely critical to the financial well-being of our state. Thank you very much, Senator Schauer and members of the committee.
Yes, sir. Thanks, Joe. Just in the interest of time, I would like to, if there's specific questions for Mr. Geldof, does anybody have a pointed question they'd like to ask? Okay, then thank you very much. You're welcome to stay on the line, Joe, and for that testimony. But just in the interest of time, we're going to move over, like you said, Senator Halford has great historical value as well. So we're going to switch to the second invited testimony today of former Senator Rick Halford. Sir, you know how it works, so when you're ready, please put yourself on the record, who you represent, and present your testimony. And if you could just make sure you're not on mute if you do hear me. Happens a lot. Rick, are you there? I'm going to try one more time real quick. Senator Halford, are you there on the line? We can't hear you if you are. One more time, just in case you're on mute. You might want to take it off.
I think I may get rid of the mute finally.
I think we found you. Rick, you're there you go. We can hear you now. When you're ready, sir, you know the drill. Put yourself on the record with your name and who you represent, and please begin. And I'm going to try to limit to about 6 or 7 minutes. I apologize, but we did want to get some public testimony. But please, I don't want to rush your historical perspective, so please go ahead. And thank you for joining us.
Well, I'd much rather use more of the time for questions than just speaking initially. But my name is Rick Halford. I don't represent anybody but my wife and my kids and my memory, which isn't perfect. But, you know, when we started this trip just so many years ago, we had the same group of people there that were the people that proposed the constitutional amendment and got it passed. I was involved in the management structure, the dividend, and so forth. But it was broadly enough supported that I was just thinking about some of the people that were there. But we had just about all of the original creators of the fund, and we had a breadth of people from Dick Randolph to Dave Cuddy to Brian Rogers, Hugh Malone, Terry Gardner. The spectrum was, you know, right to left, all the way across the board. And we all felt that the system we created was clearly constitutional, and they had all been involved in the constitutional amendment's passage, although I was not elected until after that. But the most important elements, and Joe spoke very well, and Clem's opinions are exactly right, but the thing that we lost the most in the court case was the connection between the performance of the fund, the management structure, all the things that really Elmer Rasmussen put into the mix much more than Jay Hammond did. Hammond was the advocate that made it happen, but the management structure, the things that created a fund that has been so fantastically successful, more of them came from Elmer Rasmussen than anybody else. And he certainly didn't start out as an advocate of the dividend. But the dividend grew as a defense of the fund. And the element of that defense was the realized gain averaged over 5 years. Now, we saved what we could to pass on to you to figure out. and I think we were successful at least to that end. If you go to a POMV, you're going to something that's calculated based on the gross value of the fund, not the performance of the fund in any way that impacts trustees' decisions and the investment system. But the 5%, the investment structure is not in the Constitution. So if you go to a POMV, you are gaining something, but you're also losing something. You gain some security, you gain some constitutional protection, but you lose the impact on the dividends that's connected not to the total value, but to the income of the fund. And that's an important loss. I think it may be worth the exchange if the number you choose is low enough that the fund increases in value. You still have, the mix and what you come up with, but if you came up with a POMV at 4% and you had the kind of language that's in there now with regard to the old calculation versus 50% of a new calculation, I think it's a big step in the right direction. I'd be glad to try and answer any questions, but I don't want to speak any longer than that.
No, Senator, that was actually perfect. That historical perspective in the group you ran with is really important as people understand that. I've heard many rumors here being much newer to the process of how it was a rainy day fund, which was already discussed by Joe, and how it was supposed to be used. I've heard things about cash value of the government services versus the PFD and all kinds of interesting things. So to hear this from you is very helpful, because I think setting that baseline, as Jerry, which I know you knew, Jay Ham was chief of staff, he told me this a few years ago when I was brand new. And he said, no, he knew what Jay was thinking before he got out of bed in the morning, and he made some very salient points along the lines of yourself and others on the PFD trying to defend it have made, which is how important it was, and boy, has that militant ring worked out. So I'm going to defer now to questions. I know we had a few in the committee. I'd like to get to those while we've got some time. So Senator Reinbold.
So first of all, Rick, it's such an honor to have you on the phone. I'm going to get to my question in a minute, but I'm going to do a real broad brush real quick. I just want to say thanks to Chris and Sherry and Ed and Bert and Joe and Rick. You're all either past or current constituents or friends, and thank you so much for your defense of the permanent fund. As you know, I have also been a defender and paid a dear price for voting no on budgets that cut the permanent fund dividend. Where my question to you is in regards to the connection. You made a really, really good point about the performance fund, the management structure, and how important that is. But my question is about resource development too. A lot of people are missing the connections with, if we successfully develop our resources, they should end up making a bigger permanent fund as well, because there's a larger cut that ends up going in. Would you broaden the permanent fund to include, taxes on fish or oil? I know oil already is, but mining, just taxing all the resources in general, just to promote resource development and better management of our resources. So that is directed at Rick.
That's a great question, and I have a lot of friends that think we should have put, for example, severance tax in there. I think there's a difference between the ownership interest, particularly in non-renewable resources, than taxes. I'm not sure I could support taxing one group to pay it out to another group. But the permanent fund is not based on taxes, it's based on ownership. And if it's a renewable resource ownership, it hopefully will maintain the same value into the future. But if it's a non-renewable resource ownership, then we're spending in one generation what is the property of all generations of Alaskans. And I feel badly about doing that. I don't think we've saved enough. I think we're spending the endowment as a trust land state of all future Alaskans in one generation. And I was a part of, and you're a part of the tail end of, the expenditure of somewhere in the $100 billion range of the endowment to all generations of Alaskans. If you could go back and had a crystal ball, you would say, put all of the ownership of anything non-renewable in a trust and make the trust something that carries forward through all generations. At some point, people are going to have to be educated on the banks of the Kobuk River or wherever it is, in small groups with huge costs, and the value of oil will be nowhere near as high as it is today. Obviously, it'll always be a transportation fuel and a lot of other things, but the world is changing.
Thank you, Rick. On this one, I've got another comment here, or maybe a question for you, if you could just discuss it briefly. Is I've heard, and I'm fascinated by talking about Mr. Rasmussen's connection to this when you consider some of the attitudes currently in the building. It's fascinating how things change generation to generation, I suppose. But if you were to look at the previous Senate president, for example, comments on the record that, and others that in this building currently or formerly said things to the effect of, well, I don't want to tax somebody else just to turn around and give out a dividend because it's just free money. We're handing out free money. And I think that's become a more prevalent attitude amongst certain legislators. And I was wondering if you could comment to that fact, because what you just said there about how it belongs to the people is quite at odds with some people that would try to argue that, well, in fact, why would we hand out free money via the dividend if we're going to turn around and tax, have to have an income tax to pay for it? So your comments on that, I think, would be most helpful.
Well, it goes all the way back to Wally Hickel was famous for the term that Alaska is an owner state. And what Jay Hammond did, and they became fast friends before they both passed away, but they were certainly competitors and opponents before that. But what Jay Hammond did is he individualized the ownership of that owner state through a stockholder state and gave people a stake in what was really going on. And he looked at it as all the impacts it would have. But coming back to Elmer Rasmussen, he was a very, very smart guy. And we owe a lot of the value of the permanent fund to his advice and the advisors he went with and went around the state. But he never got an answer. When you said that, people are saying what we meant when we created the permanent fund. First of all, most of the people say what we meant when we created the permanent fund were probably close to being in diapers, and they're saying it today. I don't know what their preschool had a program on the permanent fund or what it was, but Elmer tried hard to get an answer to what the reason for the permanent fund was. He spent 2 years going all over the state. Hugh Malone, other legislators went on the permanent fund working group, and they never reached a conclusion. His statement in the permanent fund papers was there was no consensus as to what it was for. It was a savings account. And as you get your kids to start a savings account, they don't necessarily know what they want. But there were elements that went all directions, but it was a savings account. And the only thing that he said there was agreement on was don't waste the money.
Thank you, sir. I understand it. Times do change, and we have hard decisions to make, but it is, I think, very helpful to get a historical perspective from those that were there, especially to clear the record on what the intent was. We always talk about legislative intent and other things. So, other questions for the senator, please, at this time. Both gentlemen, Joe and Senator Halford, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to move on after invited testimony, but we really, really appreciate you taking your time to show up today.
Thank you for your efforts.
Yes, sir. So at this time, no further questions for either of our invited testimonies. We're going to move on to public testimony, this time for SJR 1. Opening public testimony on Senate Joint Resolution 1 regarding enshrining the current PFD formula, statutory formula, into the Constitution. We have 5 that I show on the queue here to go through, and our time's a little short. I would like to ask the committee, are you okay if we do 90 seconds? If everybody's able to do that, just stay a few minutes late, try to get through it. It's not too many. Okay. As we start off, like I said, we've got the folks here. If you could please state your name, who you represent, and I'm going to ask you to try to keep it to 90 seconds regarding Senate Joint Resolution 1 if you can, so we don't go too long past, but you've all been waiting very patiently, so I'd like to give you a chance to comment. So we're going to do that. Let me get my timer set up, and I'll do my best to remind you at the 90-second mark. So we're going to start with Chris Eichenlaub again from Wasilla. Sir, when you're ready, please go ahead and present your testimony.
Chris Eichenlaub from Wasilla, and I'm testifying on behalf of myself
and I try to give you the Reader's Digest version. I'm generally in support of this SGJR1, except for the two things that Senator Wielechowski mentioned about the POMV and the I don't like that, and I don't like the ERA thing, because if we repeal SB 26 as part of it, you wouldn't have to worry about the ERA. You can leave it alone and just do it the way it was for the last 40 years. I mean, everything worked perfectly. You're going to grow. With a POMV, you're going by the value of the fund versus the earnings. People, if you just put those two pieces, you're going to take the money out of an account based on the earnings that it made, not the value, because the value over a period of time, you could lose the whole fund. I mean, so the whole notion behind it being the permanent fund, you want it to be permanent, and that's why it was designed the way it was, so it would be permanent. There was virtually no way that it could not be. I hope that our grandchildren can see $20,000 dividends, and we didn't get here from having too big of dividends. We got in this financial quagmire by basically mismanaging our resources, whether, anybody wants to, I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings, but that's how we got here. We got here by huge budgets, not huge dividends. So, basically, I generally support it, but those two things, if we could fix those, I would be all on board with it.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that. You almost made it. You're real close. A minute and 38 seconds. We're going to move on to Sherry Eichenlaub. Sherry, same thing. Put your name on the record. Who you represent, please begin.
Hi, my name is Sherry Eichenlaub. I'm from Wasilla, Alaska. I'm testifying on behalf of myself, and I'm in support of the SJR1 because I believe in the enshrinement of PFD in the Constitution. If people don't want the PFD, they can always put it to the click and give, or don't apply for it. But I really don't want the legislators to decide on what charities they want to give the money to, when I would like PFD to be continued so my children and grandchildren can have a future here in Alaska. I'm hoping they'll be able to go to college and be able to become very good citizens of the state of Alaska. So, yes, I am in support of the SJR1. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sherry, for testifying today and for a short testimony. We've got 3 to go here. See if we can get through it. We've got Edward Martin from Cooper Landing. Sir, when you're ready, name on the record, who you represent, please begin.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Shower and all the other members of the committee. This is a very, very important aspect of the future of Alaska and its children. There's 197 or 87 children in our state that will benefit from this into the future, and their children. I've been a supporter of this all my life. My dad spent many, many efforts to protect that, as some of you well know. He was behind the Save the Dividend campaign and traveled the peninsula to get signatures and testify to get us that advisory vote. I don't believe anything has changed, Senator Showers, and I know this for a fact. If we did have another advisory vote, which was mentioned, and I had suggested it years ago, that to bring us up to speed, but I believe that it's not necessary. I think that the good faith of Alaska is in Alaska, and it's amongst us. And what we do with that permanent fund dividend should be an individual basis for which they can grow their families and create their futures. Now, as far as the POMV being involved in this, I think it was a quick, let's get to a point to where the government can establish what they were going to take out of this. I think it was already in its initial statutes that provided them, and numerous times they've used it and put it into the corpus, like I believe last year they did, some of which might be good wisdom. But I can tell you right now, in the time that we live in, there's many Alaskans hurting. And to get this in, to think that this is the first time a pandemic or an emergency happens, that's false sense of security in that thought.
And Edward, if you could wrap up.
The future of Alaska is us benefiting from our resources as an owner.
Thank you very much, Edward, for calling in today. I'm going to check and see if Ruth McDonald may have dropped off the line. Is she there? Gone? Okay. Ruth, if you can hear us, I apologize. We were hoping to get to you, but I hope you didn't drop off because it was 5 o'clock. If you can call back in and listen, and feel free. We'll try to catch you. We're going to move on to Bert Hoteling from Big Lake. Bert, on the record, and who you represent, please begin.
Hi, my name is Bert Hoteling, and I represent myself. I'd like to first quote one of our very first permanent fund defenders before we even knew we needed one, Governor Jay Hammond. He never did mince words when he had to say when it came to the Alaskans' PFD. Alaska's dividend program is, of course, anything but socialistic. Socialism is government taking from the wealthy to provide what government thinks is best for all. Permanent fund dividends do just the opposite. They take the money, which by constitutional mandate belongs to all and allows all individuals to determine how to spend some of his or her share. What could be more capitalistic from Governor Jay Hammond? I am in full support of enshrining our constitutional into the statutory PFD formula into our Constitution. What I am against is SB26 still being involved with the POMV or the elimination of the corpus account and the ERA, combining them into one. They do need to remain separate so that the corpus cannot be spent. It needs to continue to grow. The only way we're going to accomplish this is by doing meaningful cuts within the budget of the state of Alaska. There are many opportunities for you guys to accomplish this year, only if you have the will and the backbone to stand up to the special interests of Alaska, who unfortunately you guys just recently passed through a bill that allows the special interests to teleconference in with you guys, where us Alaskans have to have a minute and 30 seconds to just be able to present our own case why we support a certain bill or not. I am, again, in support of SJR1 for the fact of it enshrining our Constitution of the statutory PFD. I am against the POMV draw being within it or the combining of the ERA and corpus as one account. Thank you.
Thank you, Bert, for calling in today. Did we get Ruth back on the line? She's not there. Okay, unfortunately, I apologize to Ruth. I'll just make the comment that, again, you can send in your email to SSTA, Senate State Affairs, at akleg.gov. If you didn't have a chance to testify or you just want to add it into the public record, we'll get that on there. So thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and close public testimony this time. I had intended to move this bill out today, but unfortunately we've lost some people off of the committee, so I don't believe we can. I'm going to go ahead and use for 1 second. Back on the record. Thank you. I had to get a quick question answered. It is my intent to move this out of Senate State Affairs into Judiciary next. So, Senator Reinbold, would you like to make a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that Senate State Affairs, Senate Joint Resolution 1, Work Order 32 LS 0015/A be moved out of committee, the State Affairs Committee.
Thank you, Senator Reinbold. Are there any objections? Seeing none, the bill is moved out of committee. We're going to take an ad ease to sign the paperwork. All right, we're back on the record. Next meeting is Thursday, March 4th, 3:30 p.m. We'll be hearing SB7, State Trooper Policies, Public Access, SB12, Military Spouse Courtesy License, SB40, Veterans Benefit Services regs. In addition, if time permits, we may go to bills previously heard. Seeing no further business for the committee, and I appreciate your patience going over today. We're going to adjourn at 5:07.
Hold on 1 second. I'll do a real quick recap of what we just. Thank you, all you Alaskans who have tuned in today. I really do appreciate you guys liking and sharing the video. Alaskans need to hear what is going on with our state legislators in Juneau. We got to listen to 3 different bills today, and the first one was more or less, let me just do a recap here and pull up what they are. The last one, of course, was SJR 1. Give me just a second here. Alright, we got SB83 elections, voting, ballot request. That basically that had to do with our elections and the permanent fund dividend and how they are selecting to be able to have that pre-checked on your permanent fund dividend to be able to have you registered to vote. What they're trying to do is to have that change to where now you have to check that box if you want to be registered to vote when you get your permanent fund dividend. Very important, because let's say you are receiving your mail at a different address and it's not where you receive your mail normally. And so when it comes time for election time and there happens to say maybe a mail-in ballot or something like that that you are signed up for and your address was not changed, let's say you moved from the time that you actually filed your permanent fund dividend, moved to a different location, the voter registration is not updated to your new location. So now the information is incorrect, and there's a problem with that. So they're trying to eliminate the snafus that occur with the permanent fund dividend by pre-registering you automatically to be registered to vote. The easiest way to solve this problem is of course, to make the box optional. In other words, now you would have to check the box if you want to use the address that the permanent fund dividend that you're filing for has on it. If you don't check the box, just means you didn't register to vote using your permanent fund dividend. And if you're like me, I've been registered to vote since the day I turned 18, and I have not missed a day out there when it comes to voting. So it's one of those things that to be able to be a good advocate on your own end, and this is where the big controversy is coming over the checking of the box, is that people are trying to say that it's voter suppression by forcing you to have to check that box instead of already being pre-checked. This also helps eliminate a lot of those snowbirds who don't live in state, that spend a lot of time. They spend time here, but they spend time out of state, and they just squeak by on the requirements to be able to receive a permanent fund dividend every year. Well, if they're not here to be participating, why are they registered to vote, especially if they may be voting in another location? This is just one more step to be able to ensure our voter integrity and our voter elections and making sure that they stay clean and our voter rolls stay current and up to date. We got SB84, which is the land grab, is what I like to call it. Instead of receiving a permanent fund dividend, you will receive a voucher to purchase land from the state of Alaska. Mind you, this voucher that you receive, usually the land that the state is providing up for land sales, is in remote, rural areas that are only accessible either by snowmobile, float plane, one of those things out there that the only way to really truly be able to get into these locations is to be a hardcore snowmobiler. You got own four-wheelers, established trails that may be in the general area, which there usually is not. And you got to be willing to live where there is no creature comforts like electricity or water or sewer or any of those other creature comforts, and there is no real ability to be able to have those things brought in because these are not accessible by road. So a land voucher is a nice idea instead of getting a permanent fund dividend. I know of many people that have used this throughout history in Alaska. Land vouchers was one of the way the territory first opened up. I remember a good story of why Minnesota got the name Minnesota Road, that is, why it got that name. And the people that were living there in tents while they were waiting for their land vouchers to come through in the time of the homesteading when you came here first time coming to Alaska way back when. So this is something that is something definitely worth pursuing. It would be an option. Instead of getting a permanent fund dividend, you could get yourself a voucher instead. If you're a family of four, you basically, with our $3,000 permanent fund dividends that we are seeing right at the moment, that would be $12,000 right there that you could apply for a land voucher. Most land is at 5 acres. They average about $15,000 for all 5 acres. So you'd be on the hook for about $3,000, which the state of Alaska has got a very generous loan program out there where you could finance the last $3,000 if you needed to. Or if you're just a single individual that wants to be able to start purchasing land, you could actually take your land voucher and save yourself 5 years and take that land voucher after 5 years, combine them all together, and you could outright purchase the land all by yourself with no need of being able to get another loan out there. So it is definitely an interesting proposition and an alternative to being able to get a permanent fund dividend. I know the state of Alaska or the legislators down in Juneau would prefer this to happen because that means they don't have to worry about giving us money from the permanent fund dividend. They would just give us a land voucher and they would go and spend the money they would have gave you for the permanent fund dividend on whatever special interest that they feel they want to take it and use it on, and it won't affect them one bit. Now we get to SJR1. This is Bill Wielechowski's bill for protecting the permanent fund dividend in the Constitution of the state of Alaska, and it will enshrine it under the original formula into the Constitution so that it can no longer be touched or changed by legislators without first having to go through the voter process. In other words, us Alaskans getting to vote on whether or not it would be to change after that. I'm all for enshrining it under the original formula. This is the only bill out of all the ones that they have so far in legislature towards our permanent fund dividend that I actually am willing to support. What I don't like, and they're changing it from what I had heard the last time on SJR1, is that they're talking about eliminating the corpus and the ERA and combining it all into one account and using a 5% POMV draw to determine how much money will be pulled out, and that will be split between government and us. I am not for changing the formula whatsoever. It must be enshrined under the original formula, which is what this is supposed to do. But it leaves SB26 in place. It allows the 5% draw extra that our legislators have been using for the last few years now through the bill SB26. SB26 needs to be eliminated. It needs to be taken out of the equation. Our government needs to get control of their spending. They need to spend what they have coming in. I did give testimony on the bill today. You'll be able to, if you go back and replay it, and you can hear what I had to say about it. I quoted Governor Hammond, one of our first permanent fund defenders, before we even knew we needed a permanent fund defender. And he is very right in what his statements were about how it is not a socialistic welfare program giving us welfare checks. It's anything but. It is a capitalistic program, no different than if you were to buy shares of stock in a company out there and they pay out dividends yearly based on how many shares you own. That's the way this was originally set up and the way it's supposed to be. We are the shareholders of all the wealth of the state of Alaska, and that's why we receive a permanent fund dividend. And over the last 6 years, our legislators have perverted that, and they try to claim that this is a welfare check, which is anything but. And they want us to believe everything but what the original Constitution, what the original thoughts and intentions behind the framers of our permanent fund dividend to begin with. In 1949, when we became the state of Alaska, to be able to become the state of Alaska and be able to be a part of the lower 48 and become the 49th state, we had to give up all mineral rights to everything here in the state, and it had to be given to the federal government, and a compact was agreed upon where a 50-50 split was what was going to be for the revenues of the state of Alaska. By doing this with the federal government, that gave them the assurity that we could support ourselves no matter what. And then the big oil boom happened. Prudhoe Bay was developed up during the 70s, and they got their first $900 million nest egg from the big windfall that came through the door, and they smartly, wisely invested that money into the Permanent Fund Dividend Corporation, which is where it all began. Then in 1982, they revised and reformulated what was going to happen with that account, and that's when they came up with the Permanent Fund Dividend that we now see today. Well, almost what we see today, except for the last 6 years where our legislators have been stealing whatever they feel necessary to pay for the special interests of Alaska. So I'm all in support of SJR 1. I would like to see it happen. It enshrines the original formula into the Constitution of Alaska so that our legislators can't ever change it. I completely disagree with their 5% POMV draw that they want to leave in it. Personally, I want to see that taken back out of it. If I have to compromise, I guess that is one that I would accept, but it's not going to be a 5% draw. They need to reduce it down to, say, 2%. That is going to be the only way that the permanent fund dividend, the corpus, and the ERA will continue to grow. Anything above 4% is just decimating the corpus and the permanent fund over the long term and will wipe it out. If they are to combine the corpus and the ERA into one account and change the way the formula is based, not strictly off of what they have been using for the statutory PFD for the last 40 plus years, instead that they'll change the POMV draw to be a 5% draw from the entire corpus and the ERA combined, and that is what they will determine what the draw for the government and us would be. I am not for that at all. That needs to be taken out. This is now moving over to judiciary where it will be heard next. Hopefully they'll do some revisions to it there and make it so that it's more economically feasible for Alaskans to palate and accept it for what the intention behind Senator Bill Wielechowski's bill was to begin with. And as time goes by, SJR 1 went from just enshrining our constitutional PFD into the Constitution and under the original formula to where now they added the POMV draw onto SJR 1 from its original writings a few years ago to what it is now. So I'm not enjoying or liking the changes that they're making it. They're trying to make it like all the other 6 plans to steal the PFD. The HB 300 was the name of the bill last year, and that was their 6 plans to steal the PFD. Every single one of them just meant that legislators could steal it and determine whether or not they wanted to give us a PFD in the end. That was up to them, depending on how much they spend. They've got a lot of other bills out there to try to do just that, like SB83, which is the governor's bill. We got SJR 6 and 7, I think, are the other 2 bills that they have out there. We got House Bill 37, I think is the one that they're trying to push through the House now. That one was just filed. And they're going to be taking testimony or hearings on that and then testimonies here further on. I've been watching both the Senate and the House's finance committees. And when they're listening to what they have for revenue to be able to spend and what the future of our state and capital budget looks like and what they are able to do. And I hear the same rhinos or whatever you want to call them in the Senate Finance Committee or the House Finance Committees. And the big one question that they always come out with is well, we can't pay a full permanent fund dividend if we're going to fund the state and capital budget. And they're correct. They can't pay a full dividend if they want to keep funding the state and capital budget the way that they have been illegally doing it over the last few years. If they were to follow the statutory formula and transfer that money from the ERA over to the UGF or CBR, whichever budget that they stick that into for the state and capital budget to pass out our dividends, they would have all the money in the world. Let me give you a quick example, and then I'm going to wrap things up here. We made a record $15 billion this year in the ERA. I will repeat that again. $15 billion was made this past year that is sitting in our ERA. They owe us $6 billion right now for the past stolen permanent fund dividends that they have taken from us over the last few years. That's $7,700 for each and every Alaskan man, woman, or child that we should be receiving. That total would come out to be roughly right around $6 billion for them to pay back everything they have stolen since day one. If they were to pay us this year's statutory PFD on top of that, that would be just an additional $1.8 billion. Now, if you're doing the math like I'm doing right now, that's only $8 billion. That's still $7 billion profit sitting there in the ERA account that they made just this year. So now they want to say, well, we still haven't paid for the state and capital budget yet. Well, if you look at it the way it's supposed to be looked at, our state and us, when it comes to our permanent fund dividend, we all receive the same amount of money. So if this year's permanent fund dividend is $3,000, that's roughly $1.8 billion to pay us our permanent fund dividend. The state's draw is also $1.8 billion that they would get. This is how the statutory formula is originally been set up to do. So it's not that our government doesn't get a share of the money that is already there. They do. They get an equal partnered amount that we see. Nothing less fair than you could ask for than that. I mean, honestly, $1.8 billion for government to be able to spend on whatever the hell they want. $1.8 billion goes to us citizens of Alaska for giving up our mineral wealth to become the 49th state. So what is the difference? Our government has a $3.1 billion deficit to cover that state and capital budget. So they're only getting $1.8 billion. That leaves $1.3 billion that they're short. So where are they getting that from? Well, that's the reason why our permanent fund dividends have been shorted every single year. They're taking our share of the revenue that belongs to all Alaskans, stealing it from us because they think they know how to spend it better than we do, and hand it over to the special interests of Alaska, like Alaska AFL, CIO, CIRI, Rasmussen Foundation, Recall Dunleavy, and all those other special interest groups out there that think they know how to spend our money better than we do. That's who they hand all that money over to. The nonprofits, the 300 plus that we have here in the state of Alaska that have their hands out, that just got special allowances to be able to teleconference virtually with them to do all of their lobbying there in Juneau. That they just passed that here, I think it was as of today, so that they can teleconference in all the lobbying that they do so that they don't have to actually be in Juneau to lobby them. Something that I brought up in my testimony today that is a little disgrunting, that they'll give me a minute and a half to give my P's and Q's on what I think they are doing there, but they will give unlimited time to the special interests of Alaska to do their share of complaining why they think they deserve that money more than we do. Don't forget to like and share. Send your emails into our Alaska Senate and our Alaska House about the permanent fund bills that they have going through. Again, SJR1 out of all the ones that they have out there is the only one that I am throwing some support behind. I like most of what is inside of that bill. I just don't like everything. Sometimes you got to compromise and lose a little to gain a lot, but they're asking a little bit too much out of everything. But compared to all the rest of the other bills that they have out there, all the other bills out there make it so that our legislators, it would be up to their discretion on whether or not we would see a future PFD in the future. It's always a may or shall or may. which our Supreme Court of Alaska, thanks to Governor Walker and the lawsuit that Bill Wielkowski brought up with them, shall and may mean the exact same thing. In other words, they may pay us a dividend, they may not, all up to their discretion on what they want to do. Every bill they have, except for SJR1, they will be able to decide whether or not we'll have a permanent fund dividend in the future. SJR1 is the only one that enshrines it into the Constitution under the original formula. Can never be changed again if that happens by our legislator without the vote of Alaskans. Don't forget to like and share. Go to my website, Politadick.com, and click that support button. Every penny goes right back into making sure that I have the ability to be here when things like this are happening in Juneau, so that I can be able to share them with all of you. If I don't get any support from you, then I have to go out to work at my real job, the one that makes me an income to be able to keep my lights running and such. Put food onto the table. If I have to be out there doing that, I can't be here doing this. But if you go to my website, Politadick.com, click that support button, donate a few dollars. That means that it's just one more day that I don't have to go out there and earn a living. That gives me one more day to be here, making sure that I'm sharing with you Alaskans what matters most. You all have yourself a great day. Like and share this video so Alaskans can hear what's going on down in Juneau. Thanks for tuning in.